For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe. Today's journey takes us into the regions of Anatolia, known in ancient times as Aeolis and the Troad. We've been talking a lot about the Hellenistic Kingdom of Pergamon in this series, so the first thing I want to do is take you to the capital of the kingdom, the great city of Pergamon itself, and then we will venture further north and further back in time to visit the actual city of Troy, the site where the legendary, or not so legendary, Trojan War took place. Have you ever wanted to see it firsthand? Well, stick around, and you will. Welcome to the Antiquities Travel Guide, a helping hand for visiting historic places. Follow us to different countries as we search for ancient artifacts. If you too wish to explore the ancient past through travel, we'll help you plan where to go, what to see, and how best to enjoy what you encounter. In this series of the ATG, you can accompany Tess and me on our trek through Turkey, homeland of the ancient Phrygians, Luwians, Trojans, Hittites, Lydians, Galatians, and Greeks. Come on, let's go. After an amazing day exploring the ancient ruins of Hierapolis and Laodicea, which we recounted in our last episode, check it out if you haven't yet, I and Tess and our Turkish guide Mustafa and our videographer Rachel checked into the Hotel La Bella in the city of Soma, not far from Pergamon. The hotel was inexpensive but very comfortable, and for convenience and because of time, we ate dinner and then breakfast right there in the hotel. Breakfast was included in the accommodation. Our experience overall in Turkey has been pleasant. It's a first world country for sure. The infrastructure is in excellent condition, the archaeological sites generally are maintained well, and the people have been very friendly. The western part of the country in particular is used to having tourists from all over the world.
That's, I think it's the same thing.
The tomato stuff I always eat.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Served with the kebab, maybe.
Okay, so we've been in Turkey a couple weeks now, and picked up a few Turkish words that I wanted to share with you guys. I always think it's really important when you go to a different country just to learn a few words, even if it's just hello and thank you. I think it's a form of respect, and it definitely helps you get along with some locals. So I'm here with my friend Mustafa.
Hi.
And he is going to help me with just a few words in Turkish. So number one, I think is very important, is just hello, and that is merhaba.
Yeah.
Merhaba?
Merhaba.
Merhaba.
Yeah, you should, pronounce the H a little louder. Merhaba.
Merhaba.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, we say this all the time, it's probably the number one word we use, is thank you, which is teşekkürler.
Yeah, you can say it in two ways. Teşekkürler is the short form, and teşekkür ederim.
Number three would be please. So lütfen.
Yeah, lütfen.
Lütfen. Just a way to be polite. Or if you're trying to get something, you need some help, and you don't know any other word, please help. Another very important one is bathroom. We're always looking for the bathroom wherever we are. There's a few ways to say this. So toilet is maybe a more formal way.
It's like, you can say that, but native Turkish speakers consider as rude.
Okay.
Yeah.
So lavabo.
Lavabo.
Lavabo, or they also call the bathrooms here washing room or washing closets, and they abbreviate it WC, and you call it
WC.
WC. Another great one to know is okay, and that is tamam.
Yeah, tamam.
Tamam. Tamam. That's a good way to indicate you understand or you're in agreement. Use it all the time. Tamam. Another one is just excuse me if someone's maybe in your way and you need to get by, or if you're trying to get someone's attention. Pardon?
Yeah, pardon.
Pardon.
Just like in French.
Yes, just like French.
Thanks.
Thank you for teaching me your language.
No problem at all.
Cheers. How do you say cheers?
Şerefe.
Şerefe.
The origins of Pergamon are shrouded in mystery, as is the case with many ancient cities. We know there was human activity in the surrounding region during the Neolithic and Chalcolithic eras, and material remains suggest Hittite rule around the 14th century BCE, but information regarding the settlement during this time is limited. The city was vast, and so there are remnants of it all around the area of modern Bergama, a city that got its name from Pergamon. But our goal is the city Acropolis, which is high up on a hill. Because of the lack of clear signage, we found the entrance a little difficult to find, but if you see this huge building here, you found the way to get up there.
Alright, so
We're going on up.
apparently we have to take a cable car to Pergamon. So here we go.
Yeah.
I hope no one's afraid of heights. Moo?
Now I'm good.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I took a lot of time before.
In the 2nd century BCE, the Greek historian and OG travel guide Pausanias claimed that Pergamon was first known as Teuthrania, named for the king of the region, Teuthras. King Teuthras was said to have provided refuge for Auge and her infant son Telephus, who were cast out to sea in a chest by her father after she was found to be impregnated by Heracles.
The great thing about falling is we won't just fall to the ground, we'll start rolling down the hill as well.
And if we are lucky, you will hit our heads to our rock.
According to Pausanias, Auge's tomb still existed in Pergamon during his time. Since Heracles was Zeus's son, this story linked Pergamon to the mythical god Zeus, and the propaganda was used to legitimize the Attalid dynasty's rule over the area. Though Pausanias' origin story of Pergamon may be fanciful, we know the city was well established by the 7th century BCE, and under Persian rule by the 6th century BCE. Alexander the Great controlled the area from 334, after he defeated the Persians. After Alexander's death, one of his generals, Lysimachus, gained control of Pergamon. In 301 BCE, Philetyros, or Phileteris, a commander serving under Antigonus the One-Eyed, deserted to Lysimachus's army. Lysimachus appointed him as a commander of the treasury and fortress at Pergamon. The historian Strabo reported that the treasury at Pergamon had over 9,000 silver talents, a massive sum of money in today's currency. That's about $12.6 billion US. In 282, Phileteros deserted Lysimachus and switched his allegiance to Seleucus I, another one of Alexander's generals, who gave him more freedom to govern the city. When Seleucus died in 281, Phileteros used the opportunity to strengthen control of Pergamon and keep the treasure for himself, becoming the first ruler of the Attalid dynasty. Though Phileteros was a eunuch, either because of his ties to the priesthood of Cybele, or possibly because of an injury in infancy, he adopted his nephew, Eumenes I, as heir and successor to Pergamon. His successors would build Pergamon into one of the most affluent centers of Greek culture in the world.
So we just arrived at Pergamon. We had to take a cable car up to get here, and we're about to enter the actual site. It is 200 lira to get in, which is about $7.80 in US dollars. So let's go.
Eumenes I expanded Pergamon's territory and finally liberated Pergamon from Seleucid rule, defeating the Seleucids at the Battle of Sardis in 261. Eumenes I named Attalus I as his successor to the throne, and Attalus would be the first of the Attalid dynasty to be declared king by the citizens of Pergamon. If you're planning a visit, be sure to bring plenty of drinking water, as it gets very hot and there are no vendors selling drinks at the ruins.
Sanctuary of Athena.
Attalus I forged an alliance with Rome and fought with them against Philip V of Macedonia. This alliance with Rome would be long-standing.
So here we are at the Citadel, at the very top of the Acropolis. The original version was built in the 5th or 4th century BCE. Then later in the 3rd century, it was Philetyros who expanded this, but the most work here, the most expansion was done by Eumenes II in the 2nd century BCE.
Eumenes II and his brother Aeolis II co-ruled Pergamon. They maintained their relationship with Rome while they engaged in enhancing and beautifying their city. Eumenes II commissioned the altar of Zeus, established the great library of Pergamon, and renovated the Acropolis. Aeolis II was in charge of military matters and sent several diplomatic missions to Rome. Though at one point Rome encouraged Aeolis to take control of Pergamon, he declined and assumed sole control of Pergamon only after Eumenes II died in 159 BCE.
All along here, along the eastern wall of the citadel, are the royal palaces. So these are the palaces of the various kings of Pergamon. Each one kind of wanted to have their own, so there's a whole series of them along here. Ooh, well, not sure.
A greenhouse?
A swimming pool with a diving board?
The palaces sit on a hilltop with a wall on the east, and the rest of the city on the lower slopes to the west. Philetaerus, Aeolis I, Eumenes II, and Aeolis II lived in these buildings. This temple may have been built by Philetaerus in the 3rd century BCE and resembled the Athenian Parthenon. Remnants of the delicate pillars and ornate lintels have been moved to Berlin. Those are the remains of the library, built in the 2nd century BCE by Eumenes II. Don't look for remains of traditional bookshelves in ancient libraries. Keep in mind that in ancient times, library texts were scrolls made of parchment and papyrus that were either rolled or folded. At the library in Pergamon, the texts were laid on shelves that ran parallel to the walls. Each shelf was positioned 50 centimeters, about 20 inches, from the walls to allow circulation, which protected the parchment and papyrus from humidity. According to Plutarch, the Greek philosopher, there were at least 200,000 texts housed at the library in Pergamon, and a fierce competition between the library at Pergamon and the library at Alexandria developed. Both libraries were constantly adding to their collections, and the rivalry between them was so aggressive it caused scholars of private libraries to hide their texts, fearing they would be confiscated by the Attalids or the Ptolemies and added to their famous libraries. During the Roman period, Pergamon became known for its parchment production, which possibly increased in order to reduce reliance on papyrus imports from Egypt. Pergamon became the biggest producer of parchment in the ancient world. To this day, we use the English word parchment, which comes from the Latin word pergamenum, which came from the name of the city Pergamon. Bet you didn't know that. The great library at Pergamon declined after Mark Antony gifted the entire collection to Cleopatra as a wedding present in the 1st century BCE, so it seems the Egyptians won the competition in the end. The brothers had brought Pergamon fame, glory, and luxury, but their successor, Aeolis III, was not interested in ruling. Though he maintained his luxurious city, he made no improvements and allowed Rome to manage the affairs of Pergamon. When he died in 133 BCE, he bequeathed Pergamon to Rome, not just the city, but the whole kingdom. Soon after, Aristarchus, who claimed to be the illegitimate son of Eumenes II, renamed himself Eumenes III and led a revolt, attempting to take the throne. Rome quickly squashed the revolt in 129, and Pergamon became the capital of the Roman province of Asia.
Notice the beautiful marble fragments here. This was once the temple of Trajan, built in the 2nd century CE. The archaeologists kind of organized everything, but basically these fragments are approximately where they were in the temple. But as you can see, there isn't a whole lot left. You might say the temple of Trajan, yeah, but what god did Trajan dedicate the temple to? To Trajan, yeah. Trajan and his successor Hadrian helped to build this temple, and the temple was dedicated to the imperial cult. We've talked about that before. And there would be statues of Trajan and Hadrian here, and the people would worship the spirit of the empire at this temple.
2 inscriptions were found at the entrance of the Trajaneum, as it's called. One from Thyatira, congratulating Pergamon on becoming Aeolis, a title given to cities that built imperial cult temples, and the other from Trajan's time, declaring him the Lord of land and sea. Statues of both Trajan and Hadrian were found here, and sent to the museum in Berlin.
Check this out. A statue of the Emperor Trajan right down at the bottom. This is all still part of the Temple of Trajan.
Zeus was worshipped along with the emperors in this temple too. The Trajaneum would have been a strong reminder of Rome's domination in the area, and its position in the middle of the city would have reinforced the message. As Christianity took hold, Pergamon was scorned as the seat of Satan, because it was a center for the imperial cult, and it is chastised in the book of Revelation in the New Testament. The Trajaneum was erected on a foundation covered in marble, and it was surrounded by covered stoas on 3 sides. One of the stoas, the one in the back, is higher than the others because of the terrain. The temple itself was a peripteros, meaning it was encircled by a portico with a single row of columns, 9 on the longer sides and 6 on the shorter ones.
I hope this video can convey to you just how massive this temple was. It just keeps going on and on. It was huge.
In the 1960s, the Turkish administration worked with the German Archaeological Institute to develop a plan to restore the Trajaneum. In 1976, the plan was approved, and archaeologists, architects, and stonemasons worked together with Turkish specialists to rebuild the temple. The goal of the project was to reassemble the existing loose pieces of the building. This process is called anastylosis, and can only be accomplished if the correct position of the pieces can be determined by evidence. When pieces of the temple were missing, a modern material was used to create the missing pieces so that they were clearly distinguishable from the original stones. The restoration work continued until 1994. On the slope of the rock, Roman engineers built strong parallel supporting walls, which were covered with barrel vaults. This method helped to economize on material. Though it's not known when the temple was destroyed, parts of the temple were restored several times to be used as fortifications. The substructures were also reclaimed as cisterns.
So here you can see the Theater of Dionysus, an early theater from the Hellenistic period, right on the side of a hill. Most early theaters were built on hills, much easier than making a whole building, right? And the stage initially was made of wood and dismantleable. Is dismantleable a word? I don't know. But the stage was originally made of wood. They could take it apart after performances because they didn't want to obscure the view of a temple down below dedicated to Dionysus. And they even held political assemblies here, so it wasn't just for plays and things like that. Now, we're entering from the top. Most people entered from the bottom because the top is where all the elites lived. But you can get through it from the top or the bottom. So let's see what this entrance leads to. Looks almost like a steep cliff here, but there are steps. The Theater of Dionysus here at Pergamon. It held about 10,000 people, they say.
The theater is an amazing feat of architecture. The rows of seats are arranged in a semicircle and are divided into 3 levels. The remains of the royal box can still be seen on the 2nd level. 3 sets of stairs begin from the bottom seats of the theater and stretch to the very top seats, a whopping 36 meters above the orchestra. I would say these are the original nosebleeds. The citizens would have gone to the theater to be entertained, but also for political assemblies. The horizontal landing at the base of the theater held a temple dedicated to Dionysus.
So here we are on the terrace here at the bottom, and you see these holes here? These are where they would set the wooden beams when they erected the stage. And then after the performance was over, they would take it all apart.
The Romans also built a medical sanctuary here dedicated to the healing god Asclepius, and a serapeum dedicated to Egyptian gods, which was later appropriated by early Christians and turned into the Church of St. John.
You can see the remains of the road here. So people back in ancient times, 2,000 years ago, were walking up and down this thing, just like us. This is the famous Great Altar of Pergamon, built by Eumenes II after his victory over the Gauls in 190 BCE. Now, when they first found it, there were many reliefs that were found here, all the way around, beautiful carved reliefs of showing the struggle between the Olympian gods and the subterranean powers. But to preserve them, they've been taken to museums. But this was a magnificent altar. And with a tall temple-like building on top, dedicated to Zeus and Athena.
The Great Altar was the largest structure from the Hellenistic era, measuring over 35 meters wide and 33 meters long. Originally a great staircase, 20 meters wide, was flanked by 2 arms of the building on either side that contained reliefs depicting the battle between the Olympian gods and the giants. A second level above the reliefs had a covered colonnade of Doric pillars. The inner court contained a second smaller relief depicting the life of Telephus, linking the origins of the city back to Zeus. Are you familiar with this sculpture? It's called Laocoon and His Sons, and it's now in the Vatican museums. Well, it may be a copy of an original that was made right here in a sculptor's workshop in Pergamon. There are similarities between it and the kind of work we find on the altar. During the 1860s, a German engineer named Karl Humann encountered the site of the ruins at Pergamon during construction of railway lines for the Ottoman Empire, and sent portions of the frieze to the museum in Berlin, where it became part of the collection at the Altes Museum. In 1877, Alexander Konza became a director at the museum and prompted a major excavation here at Pergamon. During this excavation, many of the artifacts, mosaics, and even massive temple facades were sent to Berlin under an agreement with the Ottoman Empire. Though the Turkish government has asked that their artifacts be returned, Germany continues to house the artifacts in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, which is closed for renovations until 2027, when the part of the museum that displays the Pergamon altar will reopen. This structure sits just outside the citadel gates and was built and dedicated to the kings of Pergamon. Aeolis I and Eumenes II were revered as gods by the citizens here. So Heroon, which is what it is often called, is probably not the most accurate name, as they were more than just honored heroes. Where we got off the cable car, there are modest shops where tourists can buy souvenirs. We try to help out the locals when we can. Pergamon is not very heavily trafficked from what we can tell.
Oh, man, this weather's been brutal, huh? Oh. Ah!
Very good ama çok güzeldi. Şunu var ya, bundan bir tane daha yok Türkiye'de veya dünyada. Ömür boyu miras bıraksın çocuklarına, torunlarına.
Tell her I love it. It's perfect. I wish I had this at the beginning of the trip. Not pass out.
Pergamon suffered a slow decline after an earthquake damaged the city in 262. In 663, the city was sacked by Muslim Arabs during their war with the Byzantine Empire, and later conquered by Turks in the 11th century. By the 14th century, the center of Pergamon was finally abandoned, and the people now live nearby at Bergama.
Yeah, that's what even other people using the elevator were like, it's fine. I was like, what?
Oh, we're coming in too fast.
Coming in hot, boys. Coming in hot.
Earthquake.
Okay, so we just got down from the cable car from Pergamon, and it turns out it costs 200 lira per person to actually ride the cable car up to Pergamon, which is about $7.70, $7.80. So a little bit, wasn't expecting that, but just keep in mind it does cost to get up to the site, and then you have to get in the actual site.
On our drive, we tried to keep ourselves entertained. Mustafa told us about Turkish insulting hand gestures.
The most famous one, you put your thumb between your second and third finger. No, you put your thumb.
Thumb. Your thumb. You mean your thumb?
Yeah, your thumb. No, thumb, not tongue.
Thumb.
Mm-hmm. No, this.
This is when you need to pronounce your THs.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a
Thumb.
your thumb
There you go.
between your second and third fingers. Like this.
You said between your third finger.
Yeah, this is your second and this is your third finger.
Third.
Third finger.
Third.
Okay.
It's like
And what does it mean?
It means up your ass. And if you have a long thumb, it would have more effect, you know.
Yeah, I've got a really long thumb.
Like that.
Like this.
Okay, we have this, but I think you have that too.
No.
How can
Yeah, what
this?
is it? Yeah, what does it mean?
It means the same thing. Up your ass.
Oh, okay.
Up your ass.
But this can be used, you know,
Cars driving by, we're all just like,
in a kind way too. Like,
oh.
you know, I was right.
On the way, we stopped at a roadside restaurant called Lezzet Duraya in the town of Gummidge, which had good reviews. We walked in and there wasn't a menu or anything. They just told us to tell them what we wanted. We pointed at some pictures on the wall and some things in the case, and they did the rest.
What do you want?
I want the Adana.
Bir tane Adana abi.
Adana, yeah. Böyle bir sevik böyle.
Everything was wonderful.
I'm not sure. It could be better. I think it's better.
It says
spoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Pasta. Yogurt.
Pomegranate syrup.
Eyvallah.
Wow. These are big portions. Look at this. It's amazing.
Bombing the photograph. This looks like pizza. Hold one. So I know Turkey recently went from Turkey to Turkey officially. Can you tell me about that? Why you guys did that? How that came about?
It was kind of a bit of a surprise for everyone in Turkey because
Oh, really?
it wasn't even a discussion or a debate about it. It was ratified in the UN last year. I think it was 4th of July.
Yeah. So a year ago.
Yeah. When you look at the news, they will tell, yeah, we did this at last. We are called Turkey now instead of Turkey. But Turkey is also a bird, and people making turkey jokes.
So that's really why they changed the name?
I don't think so. Because, like I said, no one even bothered about it. It was an online thing. Things happen in online.
Yeah.
But I can say, if you look at the news, you will see that we did it. Our government did a big job. President Erdogan changed our name from Turkey to Turkey. Everyone is, had to accept it, or this kind of strong man. These vibes.
So do you still call it Turkey, or do you call it Turkey?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, in official language, of course, it's Turkey because UN ratified it.
Yeah.
But no one would say Turkey instead of Turkey if you are a tourist and come to here and say Turkey.
Okay.
Because, like I said, no one cared. And it was just an internal politics move.
Okay.
But it wasn't even made so much news.
Yeah. Tomato.
If you're a history buff, and if you're watching this, I know you are, then you'll have heard of the next place we're visiting. We are going to Troy. Yeah, we're going to the city the bards sang about in the famous epic poem, the Iliad. And even beyond the Iliad, the Trojan War was probably ancient Greece's most famous legend. Maybe you're familiar with the tale of how the Greeks under Agamemnon sailed here from Greece to make war on the city of Troy and its king Priam. But today, instead of telling you a story, we're going to look at the ruins of the city itself and marvel at what we have learned about it. We have now made our way into the Turkish province of Çanakkale, which corresponds roughly with the ancient region known as the Troad. The large archaeological mound here is called Hisarlik, and the first person we know about that identified it as the location of Troy was Edward Daniel Clark in 1801, but his proposal was not widely accepted at the time. Archaeology of Troy began in 1856 by British Navy officer John Burton, and later by amateur researcher Frank Calvert in 1863 to 1865. Then Heinrich Schliemann continued excavations in 1871 and fiercely promoted the idea that Hisarlik was the site of Troy.
We just arrived at Troy, and it is 200 lira to get in here, which is about $7.80 US dollars. It does cost 20 lira to get in, which isn't that much money, but to park. So here we are. Unfortunately, this is the Trojan horse, not the original, but the Trojan horse at Troy. It's unfortunately under construction right now, so we can't see it. But I know there's plenty of other things to see here, so let's get started.
Can you believe it? We are at Troy. Now, one of the first things you need to learn about Troy is that it was occupied for a very long period of time. It's not just like, okay, it was during the Trojan War, then it was destroyed, and that was that. No, there were several cities in earlier periods, versions of Troy before the Trojan War, and then there were several after.
The ruins can be experienced as a walking tour or individually. There are signboards in Turkish, German, and English posted at points of interest to give you information on the ruins, and the walking path is well marked.
What you're looking at here is the oldest level of Troy, level 1. This is the first occupation of the site, the deepest layer when people first came here.
Interconnected brick and stone houses were built on terraces that slope down the hillside, and archaeologists have found early ceramics and copper objects in this earliest layer.
Here are the remnants of Troy I's fortification wall. So they were already a building for defense, even in the early Troy I period, which would have been about 2920 BCE.
The fortification walls that surrounded the first settlement show signs that they have been repaired and strengthened several times.
A few centuries after Troy I, we have a new fortification built for the city, Troy II, also used for Troy level 3, and it was made of mud brick. So you can see it here, and this was eventually destroyed around 2200 BCE by fire. We have evidence of fire destruction here, and but it was used for a very long time. I think beginning around 2550 BCE or so. The mud bricks were burnt in fire, which suggests that there was a major conflagration, which resulted in the destruction of Troy level 3. This was from 2500 to about 2200 BCE that we're talking about here. So very early.
Connie.
During the time of Troy II, the walls of the city were moved to increase the size of the settlement, but we also see structures built outside the fortification walls for the first time. Ceramics were produced using a potter's wheel, and evidence of early bronze production is present. Archaeologists have also found silver, gold, and amber jewelry in the layers, demonstrating the wealth of the upper-class citizens.
So right inside the citadel, there was a building here we call a megaron. Now this is like the forerunner of a Greek temple. Ritual activity was performed here. But this megaron we can date pretty precisely. C14 analysis has indicated that it was destroyed between 2290 and 2200 BCE. This is one of the highlights of the site. This is the citadel fortification for Troy level 2. So it's very early. We're talking about 3rd millennium BCE here, okay? And this was the ramp up into the fort. Now this has been partly reconstructed, but this is how it looked. Can you imagine? Troy 2, of course, enlarged upon Troy 1. It was much bigger, much stronger, but we're still not yet to the period of the Trojan War. This ended up being destroyed in a fire. When Schliemann found this, he also discovered a treasure at the gate with a bunch of wonderful artifacts. And he was so excited about it that he initially thought that this was the Troy of the Trojan War. But he was off by over 1,000 years, and he ended up realizing that subsequently.
The next 500 years or so correspond with excavation layers 3, 4, and 5, and we see the settlement may have experienced economic hardship, as the houses were much smaller and packed tightly together within the walls. We have evidence these people traded with early Greek settlements. From Hittite documents, we do know there was a Bronze Age city on the site called Wilusha, dating from the 2nd millennium BCE in the Kingdom of Arzawa. We also know from these documents that there was conflict over Wilusha between the Hittites and Ahiawa, a kingdom to the west of here. But how far west of here? Many scholars see a connection between the Ahiawa and the Achaeans, that is, the Greeks of Homer. Whatever the case, it seems people were fighting over Troy for a long time, and perhaps one main reason for the conflicts is that the settlement was positioned on crucial trade routes to the Mediterranean and Black Seas.
This is called Schliemann's Trench. When Heinrich Schliemann came here in the 1870s, he was looking for the Troy of the Trojan War. He didn't care about much anything else, so he dug this trench, trying to find the right level. He got all the way down to Troy 1, but he wasn't really interested in Troy 1. It wasn't until we get to the 1930s, when the American expedition came here, that they actually started studying Troy 1 more closely. It's very windy here. And we know a lot more about Troy because of the work of Begin at that time.
Schliemann excavated this trench in 1873, and in it he found gold necklaces, earrings, and other treasures. Believing he had found King Priam's treasure of the Iliad, he publicized his finds, but in reality, the artifacts dated to the 3rd millennium BCE, much earlier than the Trojan War written about in the Iliad.
This is pretty cool. Here's the other part of Schliemann's Trench. See, the hill was much higher, but he dug way down, and you can see the Roman numerals here labeling the layers for us tourists. See level 2, level 3, level 6 over there, level 3, level 4 over there. So it's give you kind of a nice cross-section of the various layers of the city.
Not only did Schliemann destroy upper layers of the city during his excavations without sufficiently recording what was there, he took for himself many of the artifacts and jewelry. Authorities revoked his excavation permits at the time, but Schliemann returned some of the treasures in exchange for permission to continue excavating. Many of the artifacts from the site have since been sent to various museums. Some of the items are at the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul, but most of the treasures were taken to Berlin, where they mysteriously vanished. In 1993, the artifacts resurfaced at the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. The Turkish and German authorities have requested their return, but the artifacts still reside in Moscow.
Now what we are looking at here are the walls of Troy level 6. This is pre-Trojan War. This version of the city lasted from about 1700 to 1250 BCE. This version of the city was destroyed in an earthquake around 1250. And then we go into the next version of the city, which is Troy 7a. And that's the city that experienced the Trojan War.
By 1300 BCE, the settlement was flourishing, and wealth from trade flowed through the city. Conflict necessitated the construction of even better fortifications. An even larger citadel was built with stronger defenses.
Here we have the south gate to the city from Troy 6 and Troy 7. So it was built during Troy 6, but it was updated during Troy 7. So yes, this would have been an active gate of the city during the Trojan War. Can you imagine Greek soldiers funneling in through there? Sometimes you'll hear on the internet people say things like, oh, did you know that archaeologists said that the Trojan War was a complete myth? It wasn't true until Schliemann proved them wrong. But the reality is a little bit more nuanced than that. The fact is, most scholars from the 1800s, from around Schliemann's time, didn't know whether there was a real Trojan War or not. Some lean more towards maybe there was, some lean more towards maybe there wasn't. Most just said, could be, it's possible, but there was no evidence for it yet. And when Schliemann found it here, not everyone was convinced. In fact, today, not everyone is convinced, but my impression is that the general consensus is that Troy, level 7a, was the city described in the Iliad. But we still don't know whether the story, all the characters are real and the story is true. None of that's been demonstrated. You can't find the people's names here or anything like that that says, Agamemnon was here. So we don't know how much of the story is true.
The gate leading to the city was flanked by defensive walls outside the city and inside the city in a spiral path. There was a gate inside the walls that couldn't be seen from outside, and there was no room to place a battering ram to force it open. The city walls were 4.5 to 5 meters thick and 6 to 10 meters high in places, with a slight slope, making it difficult for raiders to scale the wall and gain access to the inner city. Though the fortifications were formidable, the buildings inside were also defensively constructed. They were made of stone, and there were no windows at ground level, possibly to protect against internal conflict?
They're still working here. This looks like they're still working, aren't they? This is a work area. What you see right here is what's left of a temple of Athena. Now this is from later. This is Troy levels 8, 9, and 10 that this was in use. It's a temple to Athena. It's from the Greco-Roman period, and it was used for a very long time. It's when the city was called Ilion, I-L-I-O-N, during the Greek and Roman times.
By 950 BCE, this would be long after the Trojan War, the city was still alive and kicking. Evidence has been found of trade from all over the ancient world, including Greece, Crete, Mycenae, Cyprus, and the Levant. Unfortunately, the city was just transitioning to the Iron Age when another fire devastated the settlement. No traces of human activity can be found again until 700 BCE, when Greek settlers moved into the city and began restorations. The new city, which we call Troy 8, was known to the Greeks as Wilios, which morphed into Ilios or Ilion. The great temple dedicated to Athena here was built around 300 BCE, possibly by Lysimachus, one of Alexander the Great's generals and successors. The temple was surrounded by a Doric colonnade, and among other features had a relief of Helios with a halo of sunbeams riding a quadriga. The relief is now in a museum in Berlin. In the 1st century BCE, Rome seized control of the land in Asia Minor, and Ilion fought against them at first, siding with King Mithridates, who mounted a revolt. After their severe defeat, Gaius Flavius Fimbria, a Roman general notorious for his brutality, destroyed the city. The people of Ilion rebuilt, and archaeologists have marked this layer as Troy 9. In the following years, they built the new city wall, a smaller theater for musical shows and entertainment called the Odeon, and a building used for council meetings and legislation of the Boule called the Bouleuterion. They also erected the Western Sanctuary on top of an older structure.
We have here a sacred area. This was a sanctuary. It was in use for a long time. The older stuff here, you can see many different periods here from what's left. But the older stuff goes back to like the 7th or 6th century BCE, and it goes all the way up through Roman times. You can see the newer stuff on the top. So yes, a very important sacred area for the city.
The sanctuary contains 3 main altars and several wells that may have been used to collect the blood of animal sacrifices. It appears that several deities were worshipped in the sanctuary, but which deities they were is uncertain. Ceramic water pipes were placed, which channeled water through the city by fitting one pipe end into another, and sealing the joint with a compound of slaked lime and oil. In Latin, the city was known as Ilium, or Troia, from which we get the name Troy. The city of Ilium prospered under Roman rule, due in part to its connection with the mythical Troy of the Iliad, but the famous city of Troy, which had lasted for thousands of years, finally fell for the last time in an earthquake around the year 500. A short distance from the ruins is the Troy Museum.
Here we are at the Troy Museum. This is the last stop of our Western Turkey tour. I'm a little emotional right now. But here we are, we're gonna see some stuff in this museum. It is an additional 200 lira to get in, which is again about $7.80 in US dollars. So let's go.
In 2012, a competition to build a new museum at Troy began, and architectural firms from Turkey and abroad submitted bids. Yalin Architectural Design won the competition, and the new museum was completed in 2018, costing about $8 million US dollars. It's an expansive modern design that stands in contrast to the landscape and demands your attention.
Look how huge they are.
I'll be in this pot.
That's just about the right amount of coffee for Tess.
For the morning. For the morning.
Layers of Troy, number 1. Okay, here we are, level 1.
Just number 1.
Ooh. It's cool. What is this? Stela with human face. Whenever they don't know, they just describe it. It's a stela with a human face. Cool, there's some holograms in here. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. Check this out. Some actual arrowheads and other, they're mainly all arrowheads and spearheads from different eras of Troy, but a few of them, like number 4 is a bone arrowhead and number 5, the bronze arrowhead from Troy level 7. So there's an odd chance that they could have been used in the fighting. And maybe one of those arrows pierced Achilles' heel.
My assessment of this museum is that it has much capacity, but it needs more artifacts to fill it. If the Pushkin Museum returned the artifacts taken from Troy, this museum could be really amazing.
This is really cool. This is the Polyxena sarcophagus. It's from the Troad around Troy, and here we have a depiction of the story, part of the story. This is about the sacrifice of Polyxena, the daughter of King Priam and Hecuba of Troy. This comes from the 5th century BCE, the earliest sarcophagus that has figural reliefs on it in Anatolia, and it comes from the area around Troy.
That's a wrap. Excuse me.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our trip through Western Turkey is complete. After Troy, we headed back to Istanbul and made our way home. But we do have one more episode. Tess and I are going to sit down and give you an assessment of the trip as a whole and a ranking of the very best sites we visited. But we aren't consulting with each other beforehand, so we may have very different things to say. So stay tuned for the final episode of the season.